And we're live. Hey everybody, thanks for joining today. I'll give it a second to catch up. I'm not too used to this live streaming setup. And yeah. Let me refresh the screen. Okay. So, to let you know what the plan is, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and live stream what you see up here in this corner right here, MatBurn. So let me give you a little bit of background. On the Mat, the company that Scotty and I co-founded back in 1997, we were the video company. So I'm sure, well, I'll go ahead and explain it right now. So you have Flow Grappling is the main grappling streaming service right now. Before that was Budo Videos. Before that was BJJ Tapes, and this was like the recording systems. Before that, it was us. Before that, it was Pakita. So I have a collection of footage, probably mid-90s to mid-2000s in that period, that I have more footage than pretty much anybody else. We, OTM, that is, we produced a series of not only just straight up tournament videos, but we also made a series of kind of magazine type of videos. The idea was, honestly, you could pop in a jiu-jitsu video, or you could pop in, like a skateboarding video in those days, or like a VHS tape. That tells you how old I am. And you don't have to be into skateboarding to appreciate what was going on there. Well, we wanted to do jiu-jitsu videos that were the same thing. So like the idea was like, you know, we'd throw some skits in there, we'd have some action, we'd talk about personalities. You know, our inspirations were like, you know, the CKY guys, or like skateboarding, Crusty Demons and Dirt. In fact, like one of the editors of that Whackball, you'll see his name come up on the title on MatBurn, was one of the guys that helped us out with that. So there were 7 videos, depending on how you count, on the magazine style that we produced, plus the 3 volumes, 101 submissions, plus the website that we did. So MatBurn, the video that we're going to go ahead and live stream today, is the 3rd video in the series. The first 2 are American Penetration, Ringworm, MatBurn, Dengue Fever, Scar Tissue. You can kind of see a pattern here. Grappling All-Stars. And then there was Grapple Book, which was a lot of our footage, but this one was actually not done by Scotty and myself. This one was edited together by Scotty's brother, Cade, actually. He went by GrappleCon at that point. He's one of Eddie Bravo's first black belts, actually. So, the first 2 videos, American Penetration and Ringworm, those ones are never going to be released on YouTube, at least. I put it up on my private site, the online at heroesmartialarts.com, mainly because back in those days, those are great videos, but we didn't know a thing about copyright at that point. So I've actually tried to upload American Penetration before, and YouTube just pulled the whole thing right down. And there's no way to edit it at this point that I could go ahead and put that back up. Ringworm is kind of in the same category on that. Like I can get bits and pieces out there, but I couldn't do that. MatBurn, especially when we remastered this to DVD, MatBurn would be the first one that I think we could release on this type of format and go through in terms of things. And especially like when we made this version of the DVD, the tape might have had some stuff going on, like the soundtrack and stuff like that. Again, we came up in the age of Napster. But the soundtrack on the new MatBurn DVD, which is the one that we're going to be streaming, should be fine. But yeah, in my mind, like, I'm not going to say it's a bad video or anything like that. It's still enjoyable. Just to me personally, now watching back these videos from 20 years ago, or 20 years on right there, MatBurn doesn't have the kind of same thing that the other videos had on there. American Penetration was the first one. It's the baby. It's your firstborn, so you're always going to like that one the best. Warts and all, like, you know, even the mistakes or the stuff that we put on there, the stuff that I cringe right now, I kind of like, oh, that's cool. And Ringworm, I think we kind of came up and we started learning how to do this better. So in my mind, Ringworm was a superior video to American Penetration. Like the tricks we learned, some of the feedback we got, we tried to make a better video that way. MatBurn, which came out fairly quickly after Ringworm, if I remember right, more it started getting to be a chore to do this video. Like, we collected a whole bunch of footage and stuff like that. We knew we had to put out another magazine, but it doesn't hold the same kind of like I don't know what the word for that is. It's like, it seemed like, okay, look, this is a little bit more slickly produced. I don't want to say we're going through the motions, but it was a little bit different at this point. Although, like, there's some really great footage and real historical footage on MatBurn, it just doesn't hold the same thing for me. And then the next one, Dengue Fever, which is pretty much Scotty's production when he went down to Brazil. I think that takes it in a different direction because that was much more personal. Like, that was his adventures down in Brazil, all the footage that he shot. He had moved down to Brazil at that point. He can tell the story. He should do a stream talking about that one. Dengue Fever was like the first time you see competitors like Jacare, for example, on there. Although, like, this version, the remastered version, we do have Jacare on this one. Do we have Jacare? We do have Jacare on this one as a brown belt. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start streaming this. And then talking over the footage, kind of giving you the commentary. Because, like, again, it's a good video. But I think, like, you know, to me, it's like, okay, their footage is one thing right there, but some of the stories that I have for you that I can talk about coming over that, I think will make it much more interesting. That's what I hope for. And then you see over here that I know that there's the, am I pointing the right way? The chat screen right here. So I'm happy to go ahead and chat, answer questions. You know, these videos are going to stream for about 90 minutes or so. So if anybody has any questions during the lull or want help, or the lulls, and want to kind of ask me questions or talk about anything that comes up, that'll be the place to do it. So one other thing I should point out as I'm doing this, that I'm new on this, is I'm using something called OBS Studio. And which is new to me. This is how I'm getting the stream. I got the split screens and stuff like that going, which actually works out well. MatBurn's not in high definition because, again, this is 20-year-old footage. So I don't know if there's going to be a soundtrack with this or not. And another thing with OBS footage is once I go ahead and start playing, it's going to continue going. There's not an in-player control on this. So anybody that's a little bit more tech savvy than I am that's out there that knows anything about video or streaming and stuff like that, if they know of a way, either an OBS to do this, that you can go ahead and pause and play and keep going on this, or if they can recommend another piece of software. I'm not cheap, but OBS is free. I do have quite a bit of other pieces of software that wouldn't be appropriate to this. I do most of my editing in Final Cut, for example. I have licensed copies of the Adobe software, but this is my stream tool on this. So again, if the sound doesn't come up, I guess I'm gonna have to talk more, I guess. So without further ado, it's gonna play start to finish. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy this. This is MatBurn. And right away, like, you know, the way that I actually burn the DVD up here. This is some of the commercials that came up. So this is Sinister. Sinister was a brand that came out around the same time as a lot of major brands. Ed Suarez, who now runs LFA, this was his brand. He managed a lot of fighters, Anderson Silva, a lot of Brazilians. I can tell you a lot of good things about him. Sinister was the brand that actually, even if you haven't heard about it, Sinister was important that it helped out a lot of the other brands. Like Ed Suarez came from a background, he actually knew about editing things like, or marketing and clothing brands and stuff like that. Gave a lot of advice to the tap out guys, like I have a lot of advice to us. Like I strongly believe that none of us would be in the same situation if it wasn't for Ed and if it wasn't for Sinister. Headphones are dying right now, so I know the sound's working. I can go ahead and turn this off. I don't really need to hear the soundtrack on this. Good old tap out commercials. Rest in peace, Charles Lewis. You know, things, pioneers, like that you should know. A lot of people think about it responsible for MMA stuff, but you know, the truth of the matter is, tap out will show up at every event, every venue. MMA, Jitsu, they'll show up to Karate Point tournaments if you invite them in there, obviously the backyards. Sponsored a ton of guys, gave so much to the thing, sport. You know, to this day, the UFC has in their corner Charles Vasconcelos, so he'll never be forgotten. And honestly, he'll never be forgotten. Just remember, he's really one of the guys that got us to this level. Good old OTM. Right here, logo. Let me get an explanation. A lot of again, a lot of this footage is 20 years old. I was a bachelor, training hard, fight hard party, RC girls right here. This was shot, or that portion was shot during the UFC before they got big, before the Ultimate Fighter show came up. We went to go see UFC, and there was a Hawaiian Tropic bikini pageant thing, I guess. And that was the big event at the hotel, not the UFC. And I remember we got in there, and we went down to the bar with like most of the other guys were fighting or getting ready to fight. And we get there, and there's like 100 models there, and there was like 4 of us. Like me, Scotty, Danny, Elvis Simpson. I remember him, MMA fighter, UFC fighter out of Australia. And we were just like, oh, this is the greatest day ever. Because it's like the girl-to-guy ratio is ridiculous. And if there were any other people there, there were judges, like, for this pageant. So, like, the girls were on their best behavior. They're trying to suck up at everybody. So they came up to us like, hey, are you a judge? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a judge. So we got all these great pictures and footage with them and stuff like that. And, of course, the next day they figured out that we were fighters, not judges or jiu-jitsu guys. So that's what happened with that. Ooh, there's James. So yeah, here's more of that footage coming up. So yeah, it's all good, clean fun. Yeah, they're waiting us because they remember the day before. That's James right there. He was our server guy. He was our internet guy for a long time. Sherwood, Mikio. But yeah, James is the nicest guy in the world, and he helped us out with a lot of stuff. Helped us out with our internet stuff, helped us with email. Anytime we had a technical question, we'd go to him. And how do we pray him? Well, he gets super drunk on his bachelor party. He asked us to sprint down, which is the worst thing you do. But he got super drunk. He took like 30 shots at this point. And so like, you know, we took this video and we threw the OTM shirt on. He was like, oh, we're gonna make you famous. And there you go. Yeah. Not much more to say about this footage. This guy again is Mohawk. Paul. I think this is from New York. More Vegas shots right there. Yeah, so combined, again, remember our logo? Train hard, fight hard, party hard. So, back in the day, we definitely did all that stuff. Audio mix is a little bit low. I can turn the audio version off right now. So, is this better? I did want the audio kind of going in the background. I'll turn that down a bit. You tell me if that's better. There we go. All right, first match. Homer the Rock Moore versus Tony Desouza. And like I said, this was at Grappler's Quest West. I think they both won their respective division, and this was the absolute division. So first time I met both these guys was at the weigh-in. So Homer the Rock Moore came in. He looked intimidating, but big smile, big yoke dude. And he had like a hype man with him. Like, he came in, it's like, Homer the Rock Moore is going to go ahead, and he's going to win this jiu-jitsu tournament. He's like, yeah! Because the hype man was kind of, well, the MCN hype man at the same time, and like, but he had like a wrestling manager. He had the guy doing all this talking for him, and so I met him at the weigh-ins because like back in those days I just did everything: weigh-in, lay out the mats, stuff like that. Remember, the Grappler's Quest West was actually a co-production between Grappler's Quest and On the Mat rather. Okay, and then like I'm sitting there like in the line, I'm looking down like this. And then Tony Desouza comes up. Well, like, the line was up in the gym. So, like, the weigh-ins, like, day before weigh-ins, you can come into the gym. And Tony Desouza was standing buck naked in line. He literally doesn't even drop his drawers. He drops his drawers at the back of the line, not the front of the line. So, I think so. Like, I was busy doing stuff. So, like, I had my head down like this on a clipboard writing down. So, like, I'm like, next. And I look up, and literally, seating right here, like, Tony Desouza's balls are right in my face. So, that was my introduction to Tony Desouza. And Tony Desouza, like, you surely have heard a lot more things about him. He's the guy that is the inventor, or at least why we've named it the Peruvian necktie. So, like, he just had some of the meanest techniques ever. Honestly, like, we made an instructional video with him, Chalitsu, and it's just some of the meanest stuff out there. Peruvian necktie is obviously the most famous thing off of that, but plenty of other stuff on there. But, you know, this match, you saw the lineup right now. You have Tony Desouza, 159 pounds, and Homer the Rock Moore, or whatever weight he weighed in. And they both cut weight to get where they're at, obviously. Homer like won his division, which was an advanced division. First of all, like they both got invites into this 8-fight 8-man tournament, and he had guys in the 8-man tournament. It was Marc Laimon famously won that. He had Jeff Munson, Marc Laimon versus Chris Brennan in the first round. Or maybe it was a 16-man tournament. JD Penn versus Cafe. There's a lot of good matches on that. But prior to this, going into the winning their advanced tournaments, the divisions which they did respectively. Homer won a lot of things by basically knocking guys out. Like his takedowns are so explosive, and he would come up and dip guys right on their head. So he was actually kind of knocking out or stunning guys, and he would go ahead and flip over and win. Tony Desouza, of course, like was a wrestler out of Bakersfield, I believe. But there's a great like interview we did for the Chalitza. He's like, I never really cared about winning or pinning. I just wanted to see how badly I can hurt guys. That's not to say that Tony's not a good guy. But yeah, he's a mean dude on the mat. Like, some of the stuff that he's shown and done is unorthodox and really, really kind of cool stuff. And you can kind of see like, how well he is right here. Just did not care when he got on the mat. Like, obviously outweighed by 50, 60 pounds. Like, whatever. I'm just going to go ahead and come after you. And right here, short arm choke again. Perfectly legal in this circumstance in advanced division. And he gets the win right there. I think in the second round he lost to Dean Lister, was also in this division. So there's that one right there. Next matchup, Cameron Earle. Speaking of mean dudes on the mat. Now, most of you know that I have a history with Cameron, like we were main training partners, and some of you might even know the whole story about Cameron Earle. One of the top American competitors, one of Hal Gracie's top guys. Was basically going to be in prison for the rest of his life. I don't want to go too much into that right now, other than if you want to, the posts that I've made up on Reddit and various other places. Actually, it was on MMA.tv that went over to Reddit and various other places to kind of talk about that whole situation. But in his prime, which you can kind of see him in right now, although I think this is like purple or brown belt, Cameron was devastating. Like, Cameron was one of the top Americans, like, as a competitor. And the fact that he was crazy, obviously, in one sense you can say his career might have gotten so much further if he didn't do all this horrible stuff and he didn't wind up in prison if he wasn't crazy. But on the other hand, like, that craziness also probably contributed to his abilities on the mat in some ways, or at least this guy had tenacity and a meanness about him on the mat, like, especially as a competitor. It's not like he didn't respect you on the mat in that way. Yeah, like there's that move right there. He comes up short, but he wanted to intimidate you for sure. Like, he had this whole psychological thing when he came out there. Like, he had understood like Musashi, since like, when they signed him up for super fights, when his name really started to get out there, he would show up late, he would show up early, he would do everything other than what you expect him to do. And guys were intimidated by him. Like, literally, like, there was more than one grappler fighter that said, like, yeah, that's the last guy that I want to go ahead and fight on the mat. Like somebody else put it succinctly, Cameron Earle was the fighter that intimidated other fighters. And hellaciously strong for his size. Like, to this day, like, I compete lightweight and middleweight. I've always said, like, I've never felt anybody in that category nearly as strong as he was. His strength level was off the chart for his size, which is, you need that as a grappler. And like, I've rolled with a lot of grapplers. I'm not saying he's the strongest guy I've ever rolled against. Like, I've rolled with guys that were stronger than him, but like, they were much heavier than him. For a guy that competed in middleweight, cut down to like 170s, in cases 167 when he fought Abu Dhabi. Like, I'm going to say pound for pound, he was like physically just one of the strongest guys I've ever had to deal with. And he's done crazy feats of strength. Like, if you go on the CrossFit website, which hasn't been updated, well, maybe it'll get updated now with everything they're going on, but which wasn't updated for years and years and years. Originally, there were a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes on there. Like, they had a bunch of guys, because they formed up in Santa Cruz, they had a bunch of jiu-jitsu athletes there. They had a bunch of guys like First Muscle Ups, and like you see like, Garth Taylor and BJ Penn and Cameron Earle. And then they never updated that portion after the first couple of months they did that, and it stayed the same way for a long time. Like, CrossFit's another story. But he was one of the first CrossFit athletes, or he's one of the first guys to actually start doing CrossFit. But again, hellaciously strong. And yeah, if he was going to go for a submission, he better tap quick. Even in training, he was going to break it if he didn't go fast enough. Again, I can say a lot of stuff about him, but just a mean dude on the mat. But a hellacious competitor. Here's kind of some of the magazine style stuff. I don't know where we got some of this footage. Might have been B-roll for other stuff. All right. Saulo versus Margarida. And I think this year, too, this was the year that Margarida started coming up. We had first encountered Margarida as a brown belt. Like, from my understanding, he had trained at virtually every academy you could train at. But he settled in San Diego at Fabio Santos' academy for a while, and he really built up a reputation for a while. And seeing him compete, and he just basically mauled guys in the brown belt division. And then he got up to the black belt division. And at that time, again, this is 2001. At that time, like, since I had seen this guy come up the ranks, and we knew he was good, but like black belts sort of had like a certain mythical kind of standpoint right there. Like, you know, even brown belts, like, you know, remember I came from a generation, blue belt was a huge deal. Like, blue belts were really rare. Purple belts were almost unheard of. Brown belts, good luck. Like, you didn't see that. Like, you know, it's so much more widespread, whereas you have academies that have dozens of black belts now in the United States. But that wasn't the case. But anyway, there was a wide gap, like, between each of the belt rankings, and there was a wide gap even between the brown belt and the black belt level. And Saulo was a top of the food chain black belt too. Like, he was a world champion black belt while Margarida was still coming up the ranks. But this year, the year that Margarida kind of made his run and came up, I almost want to call him a legend killer. Because he came up when he won that division, he won it in a really dominating fashion. Like, he tapped out a bunch of guys. Like, it was almost, to me, like a changing of the guard. Whereas when Margarida came in, and like I said, really just kind of demolished the old guard. Tapped out a lot of guys, cross-collar chokes. A real meat and potatoes jiu-jitsu game is a lot of what people would say about him. He came through. But I don't want to call him a flash man. Like, I don't think if he doesn't train now, he doesn't train, or he's not on the same level of competition. He hasn't competed in a long time. Like, after that Worlds run that he had, took a bunch of time off, he came back, and it just wasn't quite the same since after that. And like, he had this thing, if he wasn't the dominating mat, I'm going to go ahead and use the word mat bully in this sense, he just kind of like mentally, I want to say kind of mentally checked out after that. Whereas Saulo is obviously still going strong. Not necessarily as a competitor, built one of the bigger competition teams. Coach's brother, Coach Lovato at their black belt levels. But Saulo's still heavily involved in the sport right now. And you might not have predicted it at that point. I think the prize on this one, too, was a motorcycle. I want to say that, I'm trying to think who shot this footage. You can see Alan Goes in the corner right there. I actually didn't even notice that up until now. Yeah, but I think the prize on this was a motorcycle. I remember Cameron, who was on the video before, actually, like, they kind of knew each other back from the States because they'd been in the same tournaments. Like, you know, Margarida was competing as a brown belt. Cameron was a blue belt, maybe a purple belt at that point. Cameron went down and competed. And for whatever reason, like, they became really good friends when they were down there. But Cameron came back and told me, like, he actually rode on that motorcycle with Margarida. And again, Cameron was nuts, but he said, like, he was scared for his life riding with Margarida. It was like, you know, weaving through traffic. If you've been to Brazil, you know anything about Brazilian traffic or how they, like, kind of do stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't get on a motorcycle in Brazilian traffic. After I got back from Brazil, like, honestly, like, I could barely cross the street here in the United States. I would look forward, backwards, left, right. I would do that 4 times before I would even think about crossing the street. Because, you know, they don't stop for pedestrians there. Let's just put it that way. Margarida also, you can see, like, you know, he's setting up and looking for that cross collar. He had massive hands, too. Like, you know, big banana, Tony Robbins style hands. Like, if you remember that scene, what was it? Wasn't something about Mary? Was it Jack Black that was in the elevator with Tony Robbins just talking about, like, how big, like, Tony Robbins' hands were or how massive he was? So, like, ever since that film, and I think that was something, no, was it something about Mary? What film was Jack Black in? But ever since that scene, I'm always thinking about, like, you know, that term banana hands. Margarida had bananas, big giant hands. Yeah, this is probably footage shot from the stands as opposed to mat side. I don't remember where we got this footage from. I don't know what's going on right now. I'm not listening to the audio at this point. My headphones died. I just wanted to make sure that the sound was going through. I remember there was a story also, like Saulo and Margarida. Margarida had some good rivalry, some guys out of the division. Ooh, nice takedown right there. But like they fought in their division, and then they fought in the absolute. And like I want to say the first or second day after Margarida had beaten Saulo, Saulo came back the next day and it was a big deal. Like he had gotten Rickson Gracie's gi, and it's like, because remember Saulo was representing Gracie Umatai. Saulo got his black belt from Hoyler, so like Saulo and Rickson had a pretty close relationship at that point. So like, you know, and Rickson, as far as most of us concerned, are the man. So, you know, Rickson gave Saulo his gi to kind of give him, for lack of better words, power or good luck or whatever. But Margarida still won that match. Again, like that year that like Margarida got on the mat. I wasn't there at the venue at that time, but guys I knew that were, so it was like something special. It was like one of those kind of senses or one of those kinds of moments in time that when Margarida got on the mat, you just knew something was going to happen. But I think it was kind of an important turning point too, just in the sense that, again, like black belts were so high up here, and like, you know, and they obviously everybody had to start from someplace. Every black belt was a white belt at some point, but that was kind of hard to process for me at that point, like for various reasons. So like to see somebody that kind of, even though like he was maybe even a purple belt when I had first heard of him, and then move on to brown belt and black belt, to see somebody kind of come up through the ranks and then come up and so dominating. Like I said, to me, that was a real change in the guard. That was really kind of like, okay, like this is possible. We can do this. Like, or somebody else can come up and do this right there. Not comparing myself to Margarida in that sense, but I think you know, or hoping you know what I mean, or I'm getting at that right now. Good match. I didn't actually, like, I kind of skimmed through this video before like I started streaming it, but a lot of this stuff I haven't seen in quite some time. Margarida also wound up having a great rivalry with Nino Schembre, one of my favorite competitors of all time. Just also goes to show, like, everybody has somebody that has their number. Like, you know, just because A beats B doesn't mean that B beats C. And you could be the best competitor in the world, there's going to be somebody that's your kryptonite. Whoever you are. And again, it's a style versus style type matchup. But Margarida was definitely a guy that was a lot of people found hard to deal with, especially like if you had that kind of hard-nosed old school style. Again, Margarida, when he came in, was just like the hardest nosed guy at this time. How you guys doing out there? Enjoying the footage? Let's see what he says here. Again, I think, I mean, I know what the eventual ending on this was, but I don't remember the exact particulars of this. So in a way, like, it's been some amount of years since I've watched this myself. But yeah, pretty basic and old school. What you see sitting up, looks like a baseball bat choke. Yep. And again, just those banana hands working into the collar right there. Very hard to stop. And again, Saulo has excellent defense. So, like, you know, Saulo's an absolute legend himself. But there's something about, like, you know that move is coming, you know that submission's coming, and you really can't do anything to stop it. But I wonder what Margarita's doing right now. Like, I've heard various things. Is that Bustamante that was hugging him? Again, it's been a minute since I've watched this. More Tap Out. Tap Out actually sponsored this video. Yeah, I miss Charles a lot. You know, like I said, they would show up to tons of events. I would show up to tons of events. Like, my thing was covering the American events. You know, I would show up to every grappling tournament. I would show up to a lot of MMA events. The Tap Out crew was always there, so we became friends. And since I was busy videoing, and they would have their booth, which was a table, which was just pretty low key in retrospect. If I had videos to put on, I'd put them on there too. That counter knee bar entry Cameron hit was sick. Yeah, Cameron's the reason why I don't invert. Like, he's so vicious with those knee bars. Every time I would invert, he would go ahead and hit me with the knee bar. I always kind of think of like all the knee bar entries and stuff like this. Remember, this is a time that there wasn't like this legality or like, oh, you couldn't do this move or that move. You know, when we were training, it's if it worked. Like I had to deal with knee bars and heel hooks since I was a white belt in the gi. Like, you know, we trained for the streets, man. But yeah, we didn't know the difference between any of that type of stuff. And it's not that we didn't know the difference and all that, but like all these rules and regulations and things that you were allowed and not allowed to do, it's like we didn't have that back in the day. Although, not to say the tournaments were free-for-alls or anything like that. I'm just talking about the way we trained. Hell, we trained old school Eddie Bravo, invitational, combat jiu-jitsu, slap training. We did a lot of that type of stuff too. Which quite frankly I miss, but it's a rough way of training. Like, you know, I don't think that would fly in a lot of academies or a lot of folks right now, but I've always said, like, if you were trying to strike me in a match, like if you were to turn around and start hitting me, it wouldn't faze me because that's the way it came up. And I wouldn't be happy about it necessarily, but that's the way Half made us train. You know, sometimes it was like throw boxing gloves on you till it's like, yeah, you got to take that guy down that has the boxing gloves. Alberto Crane versus Shaolin. Man, like I just posted up on this channel a Shaolin match recently. There was Shaolin versus Liazino. Like, you know, a lot more people should be talking about how good Shaolin was, how great Shaolin was. I'll get to Alberto Crane in a second, but like Shaolin's definitely the legend on this match right now. He had one of the best rivalries in the night between him, Liazino, and Marcio Feitosa. And Shaolin's like one of my favorite guys to watch. Technical, explosive, strong. Yeah, and like I said, in my opinion, actually, like out of the great rivalries in Jiu-Jitsu, that rivalry between Shaolin, Liazino, and Feitosa was like, in my opinion, one of the greatest of all times because it's a three-way rival, and the three of them, like, if you knew they were in the division, they were going to go back and forth. It was pretty awesome. In fact, like that match that I posted up was Liazino's request, actually. Like, he wanted to watch that match again. He wanted to reminisce about that. Obviously, he won that match, but it was a great match between the two of them. Like, and in my opinion, that's one of the great all-time rivalries. And Shaolin's, he does some refereeing, I believe, right now. MMA refereeing, believe it or not. He has an academy out in New York. You know, Liazino obviously went on to like found Checkmat. Feitosa's like one of the top dogs at Gracie Barra. Shaolin should be remembered in that same breath. They should be thinking about those guys too. Alberto Crane, he's a brown belt at this point. This is the Arnold Gracie's one, which was a really great event. We produced the video for, like, Helson Gracie actually hired us to come out there. We produced a really great video on this, which I do have the masters of, but he owns the rights to. It had like Saulo fighting Conan on it. It had Jeff Munson versus Dustin Dennis on there, and they had this really stacked division on here. Shanji was still a brown belt at this point. Lobato was still a brown belt. Alberto Crane, I think, was still a brown belt at this point. And again, like, Alberto Crane had spent a lot of time down in Brazil training. But again, it was like, I consider Alberto Crane one of us. In the sense that he comes through and, you know, he came up through the ranks. Like, he had a big rivalry with Cameron. They had a bunch of matches over the years. But, like, you know, I always like to see, like, the guys that I kind of came up with, the guys I would consider the legends at that time. Because, again, Shaolin was such a legend when we started. Like, he had such a reputation. Yeah, that was a big deal to see an American going at it. Or, like, seeing somebody else who wasn't Brazilian. Like, you know, we thought Brazilians were magic. Brazilian black belts were magic. Brazilians were magic. If you came in from Brazil, you had this reputation, you're automatically good. And Shaolin was really good. Yeah, the Arnold Gracies, though, like, Helson's never released the footage. Again, I have the masters on this. I might release pieces of it. We have released pieces of this over the years. That was an interesting tournament, to say the least. I'm sure you've heard some things about the Helson Gracie run, Arnold Gracie's. What was this, 2001, 2002, or something like that? And it was the first time there, and it's like, you couldn't get a hotel room in that place. Like, you know, the Arnold's is just a massive event that happens there. So, I wound up, like, hotel room, like, you know, it was $12 a night or something like that. And I think Alberto was next to us. I don't think he actually stayed in there, but, like, he came over a couple of times. But if you can imagine this lineup, me, Scotty, Ryan Gregg, Jeff Munson, we had picked him at the airport. This was the first time we started hanging out with Jeff. Dean Lister wound up in this hotel room. Alberto, and I think he was hanging out with a guy named Vinny at that point. He was a brown belt also, who actually wound up competing in this tournament also. Yeah, that was some good times. You know, I've told some of the stories before. One of the stories is like after the tournament, like and everybody had gone, we wanted to go out, and there's not a whole lot to do in Columbus, and Dean Lister and I wound up hanging out, and Dean Lister is like, you know, he wasn't the intimidating, I mean, like, he is an intimidating fighter and all that, but he didn't have quite that same level of fame. And we wound up getting picked up by these girls who started driving us around Columbus, like, and you know, Dean's way of like interacting, like, or talking to girls and stuff like that, wouldn't be talking about jiu-jitsu or anything like that. He likes trying to do magic tricks, but really badly. Like, you know, like, it's like almost those scenes like, oh, I'm gonna make this fork levitate, and the fork would drop down. And granted, like, I think we were both been inebriated by this point, but I remember these girls like got sick of, I'm gonna say sick of Dean, because it clearly wasn't me, but they wound up ditching us like somewhere in downtown Columbus, and there were natives there, and like we were drunk, and like we didn't have cell phones at that point. I don't remember even how we got home, because we didn't remember what the hotel room was, but yeah, that's a fond memory, stumbling around drunk in Columbus after the Arnold Gracie with Dean Lister. Alberto's hanging on pretty well right here. I haven't seen this match in a while. Like I said, you know, the fact that Alberto's able to go against Shaolin for this long, in my mind at that time, was really impressive. Like, I mean, Alberto's still like pretty active on the scene in the terms of his. He's got 2 schools down in Southern California. He's working like tack fit, like kind of like gloves, not gloves, clubs type workout and stuff like that, like the Eastern European type thing. Still competes every now and again too, being about my age and stuff like that. But yeah, the fact that he came in here and gave Shaolin a fight was, again, at that time, like, Shaolin was like honestly one of my heroes. Like, just seeing this guy compete and what this guy can do. Oh, thanks for joining on the chat, Donnie. What happened to the drummer of Tool? Does he still train BJJ? Now, it's the lead singer, Maynard. And yeah, I believe he does. I see on his Instagram that he does training, stuff like that. I actually, he's in the closet right now. It's someplace else. He designed a couple of gis, actually. I have all of them because he designed them in conjunction with Scotty and Lucky. Lucky Gi brand with Scotty, my partner. They might be in the closet behind me. I think they're at the gym, actually, though. But he's still pretty involved. That deep half guard is tricky to deal with. I think around this phase, too, it's like not just Alberto that does this. The match isn't on here. Like, Shanji wound up winning his division, like the middle division, whatever it was. He beat Kakareko, who's like a super intimidating looking guy, and he won that on the deep half guard. And he got his black belt at this event too. Right afterwards, Saulo promoted Shanji to black belt right here in Ohio, where they had an affiliation actually also, but he got promoted on the podium. And at that point, actually, Shanji was all deep half guard. Like, that's what he was known for. And I'll never forget this. I mean, Shanji's obviously known for a lot more now, and like as well-rounded as his game and whatnot. I remember going to a seminar with the with the Hibero brothers, and Shanji was showing all his deep half guard stuff. And then Saulo pulls me aside, was like, "Hey, Gumby, come over here." It's like, "Want to know how to beat it?" And he showed me the proverbial one little trick of how to beat Shanji's half guard. And it was like literally as simple as like, how do you shift your weight? And he was showing me like, okay, this is how you defeat that deep half guard. And he let Shanji put me in there, and Shanji couldn't deal with the technique that Saulo showed me, which was really impressive. Shanji's kicked my ass plenty of times since then. Like, I don't want to say I'm anywhere near Shanji's level, but funny story. Okay, so this is U.S. Open at some year, and Gabriel Santos. So Gabriel Santos, and a quick match right there. This is Eddie Bravo's first protege. And you can see like rubber guard stuff right now, right? Like, I hadn't seen this in a while. This was Eddie Bravo's protege coming up right here and doing stuff. Unfortunately, he's not involved with this at all. Like, he got into some trouble at some point afterwards. I don't think he ever progressed past blue belt and stuff like that. But you see the seeds of what Eddie Bravo is teaching. Like, granted they were representing Jean-Jacques Machado at this point, and he was always representing him really well. But like, at every academy, like, the higher belts will take somebody under the wing. Eddie Bravo has always been really generous with his techniques, and we show you, like, he'd enter in a tournament because he competed a lot. Like afterwards we all go exchanging ideas. But it was Gabriel right here that was really kind of going ahead and the first guy that really kind of put everything into action on this. And this kid was a prodigy. I overuse that word a lot. Remember, I'm the guy that gave BJ Penn that nickname. But yeah, you can absolutely see the roots of the 10th Planet stuff, the Eddie Bravo stuff. And you're saying, well, like, well, he isn't a gi right there. I was like, well, Eddie Bravo got his black belt in the gi, and he's a classically trained guy. But yeah, Gabriel came up and he was like one of my favorite guys to watch, like exciting. When I say exciting guys to watch, like, remember, this is the US Open circa 2000 or something like this 20 years ago. There weren't going to be like brown belt and black belt matches, or very rarely right there. So like the action was going to happen on the blue and purple belt matches. And I want to say he was like 15 or 16 at the time of this match, fighting against adults. Here's another good one, or another name you haven't thought about in a while. Fernando Vasconcelos versus Paulo Guilobel. Now Fernando, funny story, like, he's either half American, half Brazilian, in the sense that, how do I want to put this? There's a couple of guys out there that they spent time or split their time between America and Brazil that they don't really get kind of embraced by either category. Like, in the sense the Brazilians consider him American and the Americans consider him Brazilian. Fernando Vasconcelos kind of fell into that category, but he won the Pan Ams in his division. It's like really high technical level, and he was training at that time the Raw Gym. Raw Gym, of course, is where like Rico Chiapparelli's gym, whereas like he produced guys like the Raw team at that point. It was like Randy Couture, Dan Henderson, Matt Lindland. So like Fernando Vasconcelos was their coach, or their jiu-jitsu coach, and he was learning wrestling from them. And they were just raving about how good this guy's wrestling was. And Chiapparelli, if you don't know, Dan Gable considered Rico Chiapparelli one of his top guys ever. Like, and if you've ever seen Rico Chiapparelli, he doesn't have the build of what you would consider a wrestler. He's more like us, tall, lanky. But from a technical standpoint or wrestling standpoint or whatever, like, Gable always had really high praise for Chiapparelli's abilities, and Chiapparelli always had really high praise for Fernando Vasconcelos' wrestling ability. And he was training kickboxing too. So on paper, Fernando Vasconcelos came off like he was going to be the best MMA fighter in the world, or whatever he was doing, in the sense that he had like world-class jiu-jitsu skills. Like you have the best wrestlers saying like, yeah, he can take guys down. Like, he's hanging with at least the names that I had mentioned before, and his kickboxing was really high. And he built up this really high record in MMA also. Until like a King of the Cage, I remember this, like he wound up fighting Carl Parisian. And Carl Parisian, one of Goker's guys, fought in the UFC, had a good run in there. I think a lot of people remember him. If there was ever an instance that I saw somebody's soul leaving the cage, it was when Carl Parisian beat Fernando Vasconcelos. Because Fernando Vasconcelos, came in with all the hype and all that, and just couldn't overwhelm Carl in the first round. And Carl just kind of came through, and I can't remember, it was ultimately a decision. I'm pretty sure it was a decision, but it was a really one-sided decision at that point. But at some point, it was just kind of like, okay, like, whatever, like, Fernando threw in the first round everything in the kitchen sink at Carl, and Carl was still standing after that. And like I said, you can just see the fight completely drain out of him. I'm not sure if he ever fought again. Like I said, brilliant talent. And it goes to show, like, this sometimes happens. I've heard that he's a cop now. Somebody will have to kind of confirm that for me if anybody's out there watching. That was, that's what I've heard. But man, he was fun to watch. And it's funny, like you see him right here, because Paulo Guilobel was like a Machado guy too. I think I'd have to look up where Fernando got his black belt from. Machado's produced so many black belts. Even at this point, like, I want to say, like, they produced some of the first sport competitors, American black belts. Like, you look at the Dirty Dozen list, half of the first 5 guys, like David Meyer, Bob Bass, Chris Howder, were Machado guys. So like Keegan Machado guys, especially. I want to say Fernando got his black belt from the Machado brothers, but now I can't remember. One of those things kind of looking at. Anyway, you can see on top, and like Guilobel's still on the scene too. Like, you know, he has this thing. Like, I think he went to Six Blades or Ribero's. I'm not sure who he's representing right now. And I don't think he originally got his black belt from the Machados. I want to say it was Henrique something, but I'd have to look that up. But yeah, Fernando Vasconcelos is a guy that a lot of us, like from back in the day, remember. Like, that guy was supposed to be the next big thing. Who was the original group of guys he started training with at House? When I started in '96, I remember there was 2 blue belts there. Actually, maybe 3. Bobby Southworth, you might remember the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. Still actually talk to him. Dave Camarillo, and another guy named Kevin, who wound up going to the Special Forces. And then everybody else were white belts. First lesson I had was with Troy Denning, who's now a famous tattoo artist in New York. Like, he was like my first day partner. I think he was a blue belt at that point too. He got his blue belt from someplace. I want to say Hickson's. I have to ask him. He stayed blue belt a long time though. Eventually, like, I started before Cameron Earle did. I started before BJ Penn did. Kurt Osiander was the first guy that trained, and at the time, because it was 2 academies, it was a Half Gracie Caesar Academy. So Half taught 4 days a week or 5 days a week, whatever, in Mountain View, and then Caesar would come 1 day a week in Mountain View, and vice versa over in Pleasant Hill. But eventually they had a split, so Half was 100% Mountain View, and Caesar was 100% Pleasant Hill. Although for a while, when we'd enter tournaments, it'd be the Half Caesar team still. So I consider guys, even though I didn't really train much with them, like Dave Terrell, Monty Egbert, Gil Castillo, as my training partners, as guys that I came up to. And I consider, like, I'm obviously a Half guy, but I consider Caesar Gracie one of my first coaches too. He showed me a lot, and so I always want to make sure that I give him that level of respect. Hyen, for all the stories, I mean, like, I actually have a video that I talk about training with Half, Hyen, and Henzo. Hyen was super nice to me. I know what his reputation was. He was actually extra nice to me. Like, actually kind of like was really gentle with me. He called me Birdman one time because he didn't speak any English at all. Like, he didn't even attempt to learn any English, quite frankly. But yeah, he was always super kind to me when he was on the mat. Showed me a lot of stuff. I remember one time, like, Cameron was playing a bit rough with me, and he was like a bit blue belly. Like, Cameron could do that because, again, he was crazy, and like, and I remember Hyen roughing him up after that. Because Hyen was at that level. You know, I'll tell you right now, the secret to dealing with Hyen, like, I've heard a lot of stories with him, like, he would come over, give him a lot of weed. Like, that mellowed him out a ton. And then, like, he'd hang out at the famous warehouse that we had, and he'd just be stoned and hanging out there. Like, you know, Half would drop him off. You know, Half was teetotaler at that time, too. But Half would drop Hyen off at the warehouse just because they knew that he'd be way easier to deal with at that point. Any gym assassins back in the day who were never that well known? Yeah, like, they were all kind of known. Like, I'm trying to think, like, if there was a secret weapon guy that was in there, but honestly, they might be guys that, like, were kind of famous on the local scene. They were famous at a certain level, but, like, just wasn't that big of a scene at that point. You know, one name that I can think of out of that crew that was a big deal was a guy named Brandon Dennington. And Brandon Dennington was like a multiple-time Olympic trial wrestler. And it was a huge deal when Brandon Dennington started training jiu-jitsu. He was roommates with Randy Couture, actually, at Oklahoma or in college. And tremendous wrestler. Real strong, physical guy. I wish I learned more wrestling from him, but he was there. He wanted to be a 100% jiu-jitsu guy. The story goes that he thought, you know, in his own words, jiu-jitsu is bullshit. So he went in to try it out. And at that time, speaking of assassins, like, Nino Schembre was teaching at the academy. Like, they had brought him up to Northern California to teach. So, like, they brought him up. Well, he happened to be there. And so, like, you know, Brandon's like, okay, what the hell is this? Like, this is nothing. It's just basically wrestling. So they threw a gi on Brandon, and Nino tapped out Brandon a bunch of times. And he was like, oh, fuck this shit. Like, you know, it's all about this gi and stuff like that. So he ripped the gi off. And Nino tapped him a bunch more times. Like, he's like, okay, that's it. It's I'm a jiu-jitsu guy now, but like the wrestlers apparently weren't that happy about that because back in those days, like you're a jiu-jitsu guy, like you're a wrestler, I'm a kickboxer, like it was still style versus style at that point. I'm a catch wrestler or whatever it was. That was kind of the mentality back in the 90s, and I think about it too, that you're one thing or another right there. Like when I was a kid, it's like you either do BMX or you're skateboarding and you hated the other guy, or maybe we all hated rollerbladers or something like that. But there was not this kind of unity. It's like all stuff that are cool and we have respect for everything. It's like, nah, you did one or the other, and there was this rivalry. So like again, when the guys like Brandon Dennington at that point was one of the highest level wrestlers to actually go ahead and cross over in jiu-jitsu. And he competed a few times too. Like you compete in tournaments. He had some various things. Like I remember Dean Lister wound up tapping him out at blue belt. And then Brandon fought in MMA. Like he fought in the same event that Dave Camarillo fought in. There was an 8-man tournament that both of them fought in. That's a long story. Like Dave didn't even know he was going to be fighting. He did all the training with him, and then Half, like he went there to corner Brandon, and Half's like, okay, you're fighting right there, which is a great way of getting Dave ready, because like if you told Dave 6 months in advance, it would have been hard to get him at that point. But if you told him like, yeah, somebody's coming at the door and you have to take care of him, Dave would be on it like that. So like that was a perfect strategy right there, except for the fact that Dave and I got super drunk the night before, like wasted drunk the night before. He had no idea who was fighting that day. So yeah, secrets out of the bag. Like Dave, I don't know if we got overs back that day, but we got really drunk the night before that fight. But at any rate, like the idea of like, oh, you're going to use jiu-jitsu, you're going to do that. So Brandon fought a guy named Raven. Raven was like one of the guys out of Sacramento. Raven was one of Cassio's guys. Raven would come in, he had this shamanistic costume. He would try to steal your energy before matches. Like he literally walked around, he had like a medicine staff and like, I don't want to, like, this Native American stuff on him. And he had this MMA, and like he was well known on the scene too. He had some great matches and stuff like that, although you haven't heard of him. And like you think like, oh, this is gonna be this great technical jiu-jitsu battle or whatever. And Brandon just took him down and just ground and pound and beat the shit out of him. Like it was ugly in the fact that he just got them out and just like boom, 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 boom. Like and the funny thing is especially like I did all that training with Brandon, like techniques and submissions and all that type of stuff. And yeah, there were no submissions about that match. It was literally like, before ground and pound, that was ground and pound there. And I'll never forget this. Like, like Brandon was just like, yeah, sometimes, like, technique, whatever. Sometimes my daddy just said you had to hate the other guy a little bit more to win the fight. So, yeah, but he was a monster. And then he went off the scene for a long time, too. Brandon did. I remember he came back. Like, every now and again, he would show up to the academy. There'd be a generation of guys that hadn't seen before. Maybe even guys that are upper belt, because he stayed at, like, blue belt for years. And we just sit in the corner and we watch this blue belt just destroy. And like when I say destroy, we're talking about like upper half Gracie belts. Like if you know anything from our time, our scenery right now, that was no joke. You just see like Brandon come in and just rip apart guys, and they just have this like, how the hell is this blue belt doing this to me? They're just like yeah, that's Brandon. He's been training with us for years. Oh yeah, and he's like Olympic caliber wrestler, and he's been training jiu-jitsu for as long as you have. He just didn't care about the belts. So, Guilobel has a school down in SoCal. Yeah, I knew that. Like, I wanted to say if he was San Diego. Like, I still see the guy around the scenes. Like, he's producing good students like that. He still competes in the Masters divisions and whatnot, too. Got Ryan Gregg up here. At one point was partnering up with OTM. Like, I want to say Ryan was, like, one of Hegan's best guys. Like, for whatever issues I may or may not have with him right now or whatever business stuff and all that, I can't deny how talented this guy was on the mat. Like, he was amazing. And he actually taught me a lot of jiu-jitsu, too. If he had the focus, and like competing wasn't even his big thing right there. He did this for fun, but if he took competing as seriously as some other folks did, like he would have gone really far on that. He had other interests and stuff like that in mind, which sometimes happens, but yeah, he was a beast. I want to say at the time and it took him forever. He took him forever to get his black belt for whatever reason. Like there was kind of a race from what I remember for guys that wanted to claim credit and give him the black belt, but he specifically wanted, like, he started with Machados, he wanted it from the Machados, but he could have gotten it from a few other guys too. And he showed me this move, which I still like doing. This is known as a twister mount right here. So this is a spinal lock right here. Again, not IBJJF or whatever legal right there, but that's basically you got your arm going one way, your legs going another, and that puts all this torque and compression on your spine. And actually, it's fairly easy to do. Anytime somebody defends a mount by crossing their leg over, like the guy on the bottom is doing right now, which is why I always teach my students never defend a mount like this way, or never defend a side control. You're setting this up as a twister mount. And furthermore, well, I guess you can get away with that now because it's not IBJJF legal. You can't do spinal locks on there, but this is a great example of like, you better know everything, or like there's certain traps that people will get because certain moves aren't legal. Like spine locks aren't legal in the IBJJF. So most guys that train in like an IBJJF setting, most guys that I've done this to never saw that coming. There's a couple of videos I have of Ryan doing that same match and definitely showed that to me. I think Rodrido Medieros actually gave us this footage. You want to kind of share it. Like Rodrido Medieros obviously has been training and teaching in San Diego for some time. And he went down and won the Masters division. He's produced a lot of good guys. But he gave us this footage to kind of share. Actually, it kind of tripped me out because I've been following him for a long time. And I remember the first time that I entered a division. And nowadays, like, I think we're in the same division now. So, like, it's that kind of feeling, like, especially for me right now when I compete, and like I see guys in my division that were black belts when I was coming up, or black belts that I feature on my videos, like, oh crap, you're in my division. That's a sick armbar right there. And Rodrigo Medieros is certainly one of those guys, like when I see him in the division, it's like I remember stuff like this. But you know, we all throw our gi pants on one leg at a time, I guess. But yeah, I can't even begin to describe, like, and for those of you that are out there that have experienced, like, when somebody came up really admiring, idolizing, and putting out there, and then you find yourself in the same division as them, it's like, whoa. And I'm not the greatest competitor in the world. Like, I go out there, I have fun, like, you know, I'm going to try to beat you when I'm out there, and I've won some, I lost some, and all that. Competing was, I don't want to say competing wasn't my thing. Like, I made the conscious choice at some point, like, I couldn't do the film work and the OTM work and go to the tournaments and do what I had to do and compete at the same time. I had to pick one or the other. And quite frankly, as a competitor, like, I wasn't the top dog at the gym. Like, in my weight category, even though the belt, like Camarillo and Earle would just beat my ass on a regular basis. So that might have affected it. But I also kind of felt that, you know, there was a lot of people that could compete, but the role that I had with OTM, with going out and filming and promoting and doing all that stuff was unique. So I chose that path at that point. But I didn't find that it was possible to do both. Like, you know, guys nowadays, like, will make that choice. Like, can you coach and compete at the same time? Most people would say that's really, really tough. Like, the second you really start focusing on your students, you're going to go ahead and that focus has to come off you. You know, Marc Schultz, wrestler, Olympic wrestler, foxcatcher and all that, really made a good point about the difference between competing and coaching. He had a lot of wisdom, actually. Like, we've had some good conversations, but like one of the best lines that he gave me was like, you know, when you're a competitor, you're selfish. Like, you're taking in all this stuff, you're pulling information in, and you don't share it. Like, you gather, you hoard, you hide it, and you do that to be a better competitor. And then when you decide you want to coach, your job is to give it all away. This is one of my all-time favorite clips, Rumino Sato and this edit together. The original soundtrack we had was Protege, which obviously wouldn't fly right now because of copyright issues, although I think that copy's floating around the net. This one is ARE Weapons, which is actually, this band's a friend of ours. So we were able to get the rights and put this video up. And this has one of my all-time favorite stories. Like, if you don't know how, like out of Japanese fighters, like, you know, at this era, like, you know, he had, like, in this weight class also with Shudo and stuff like this is like kind of sub 150 or something like that. You had Sato and you had Uno, but like, I would say Sato's like one of the most all-time exciting fighters. But he took a loss in Shudo to some Canadian guy, and like, it was considered a fluke at the time that he lost this match. And Sato was so distraught about this that he heard that the guy was going to compete in a tournament, a local jiu-jitsu tournament. And I think this is like not like in a judo or grappling or not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament. This is not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament. It's some other kind of thing. But he heard that the guy that had beat him was never going to fly back to Japan and fight him again. So Sato wanted to avenge that loss. So he flew to Canada to go ahead and enter this tournament and avenge that loss. I want to say the guy's name is Joel. I'll have to look that up. We thought, but yeah. So, and Sato put on a clinic here. Like, again, he clearly had some jiu-jitsu training. Like, rumor has it he went down to Brazil and trained at Carlsen's at some point. Plus, like, the whole, like, jiu-jitsu came from Japan and went to Brazil. Like, it's not like they can't grapple here either. But I consider Sato to be one of the most exciting guys of all time. Like, look at some old Sato in his Rumino Sato in his prime. Like, Sato was my hero, or one of many heroes, obviously. I love it. I've watched this clip so many times, and like when we were coming, it's like I want to try this, like the flying attacks and stuff like that. He's known for that flying arm lock. Like, he actually finished an MMA fight in 7 seconds with a flying arm lock. Ironically enough, the guy he finished off was a guy named, I believe, Charles Lewis. I've trained with him before. He's come into my school. At one point, he was like that MMA tournament that I talked about, that 8-man that Dave Camarillo was supposed to fight in. Well, Dave Camarillo is also known for his flying arm lock, was supposed to fight Charles in the second round. But Frank Shamrock was cornering him at the time, and Frank said, like, yeah, there's no way my guy is ready for this. So he pulled his guy out, even though Charles wanted to fight. Like, let's be clear, like, Charles didn't pull him out. Like, Charles wasn't afraid of Dave. Frank Shamrock pulled his opponent out. Says, like, yeah, my guy has no chance of beating Dave, essentially. Made that coaching decision. And then not too much later after that, Charles Lewis winds up fighting in Japan against Rumino Sato, and he's the recipient of that 7-second flying arm lock. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about, like, yeah, just that. Like, jiu-jitsu, like, we kind of believe in safety first, then position, then finish. But, like, Rumino Sato's, like, one of those guys that comes out and is like, I'm going to make this match exciting. I want to come out and finish you. I'm going to go ahead and do these kind of spectacular. Like, as the Japanese fighters, like, people think about Aoki right now being that guy. But before Aoki, it was Sato. Like, kind of that holy trinity of, like, lighter weight Japanese guys. You had Sato, Uno, that one. Gomi, Mach Sakurai, who actually competed in Abu Dhabi also, with, like, I think 6 wins. But, like, in terms of, I don't want to say favorite out of them, but, like, in terms of the exciting ones, like, there was something about, like, a Rumino Sato match. Like, you can go ahead, and I highly recommend looking up his old matches. Like, they're fun. He's a really fun, exciting, go for broke. And that Japanese kind of mentality, like, again, he's going to fly literally across the world to avenge a loss. How crazy is that? How crazy is that? I loved your old school story post on Reddit years ago, the bouncer stories. I should post up more on there. Or like I did. Like, I want more people. I'm trying to do these kind of podcasts and stories and doing live stuff, and I'm trying to have conversations and stuff like that. Yeah, the bouncing story is a little bit crazy. I'll talk about them at some point a little bit more. I think, like, again, like, jiu-jitsu is, bouncing is, if you're a full-time trainer or if training full-time, bouncing, I don't want to say it's an easy way to make a living, but it makes sense. Like, you're physically fit, active, kind of have this presence about you, and a lot of times the bouncing hours work really well with your ability to train if you forget the fact that you have to sleep and whatnot. But in terms, you got to make money, so you're training during the day and you bounce at night. And not to mention the fact when you're a bouncer, like, actually at that point in my life, I had a good job. Or I had, like, a high-paying, like, Silicon Valley 1.0 type of job. So, like, I didn't need to bounce, but, like, I had the skills and, I guess, the charisma. Like, I kind of got into that lifestyle right there, the club courtesy, like, the ability to get to talk to people, girls. Yeah, bouncing was a pretty easy choice to do. I enjoyed doing it at that point. Although, I'm glad I got out of it when I got out of it. Like, I have to point out that there are risks involved when you do that. I'm not sure what stories I told. Like, I have to go back and look that up because I have quite a few of them. But it's like when you're single and you're young, great job. When you get older, like, I did that as a favor to somebody, and it's like all I wanted to do is get home to my girl. like it was the last place I wanted to be. Like, clubbing was so much fun when I was young, and nowadays it's like I couldn't picture myself in a club Like the idea of sitting around type music, couldn't deal with it. Dude, I love this clip. I can go back and rewind and watch this a bunch of times. I have. There's some clips I've watched this dozens of times. This is Scotty's editing job too. Like somebody sends us the footage, like, oh, you got to do something with this, and Scotty put this together. Like I think, honestly, this is one of Scotty's best projects and the best things he ever did. Funny thing about this footage is that when BJ sees this right now, when he talks about this, he actually cringes because he did a lot of jiu-jitsu and guard pulling work on here. He didn't try to do too much judo. So in later years, he's actually been much more respectful about jiu-jitsu or judo. Like he said at one point in conversations, he actually thought the judo stance was better for MMA than wrestling. And I can't remember what his reason on this is. Obviously, he's been in the cage. He would know about that. But he got to this point where he really, really wanted to work on his judo. Like the judo coach that I had at Heroes, my gym, Shozo, who's at one point the judo coach at San Jose State. If you know about San Jose State, it's the top Olympic. It's one of the top programs in the country. They produce more Olympians than ever. Their coach, Yoshishida, is like one of the reasons why judo is even in the Olympics. Like he's 100. He turned 100 years old this year. We were supposed to have a big birthday party for him, and then COVID hit. So I hope he seems like he'll live forever, but I hope he's still around so we can still have that birthday party. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, he actually flew out my judo coach to train with him to show him judo back in Hawaii. Yeah, so like, but this is also a time we were just going to go ahead and enter a bunch of tournaments and see what it was. Like, I haven't competed in judo myself since I was a kid, but I remember training in judo at various spots. San Jose State team. Although to be fair, like when I would go in and work with those guys, it was more to observe, like, because it wasn't training or learning, it's more of like practice. So they were a much higher level judo. Like they were a high enough level of judo compared to where I was at that it'd be a waste of their time to really kind of train with me unless it went to the ground. But then I wound up finding like another place to train. Like there was a bit more instructional type classes, like kind of it wasn't a Y, but I can't remember, like just some judo club. So we would go there on occasion, do judo. In the same way, also like BJ like started wrestling at West Valley Wrestling. So like it's a local community college around here. Some of the coaches and some of the wrestling programs are in here. Like BJ was really open-minded about his training, wanted to go ahead and learn a bunch of stuff. So like obviously he's known for his jiu-jitsu, but I think one of the reasons why he accelerated so much and did everything so well was the fact that he came back and he like, okay, I want to learn wrestling, I want to learn kickboxing, I want to learn like. He was a student first, like, and the guys that are open-minded about this and like want to kind of pick and pull out all this information and have the time and like natural talent to do that, we're going to be devastating. So I don't remember how much judo BJ actually. He obviously had to do something to this point. He's wearing his white belt, or maybe he just entered into a local tournament on this. But we've been in the Stanford wrestling room, for example. At one point, the Stanford wrestling coach was really sympathetic. They liked other people coming in and working with their guys. And then a new coach came in that didn't want to have anything. He wanted to close it up, so he wouldn't let us in. But the West Valley coach really loved wrestling. And he wanted to kind of help people do that. And he just wanted to kind of spread the art. And, God, I wish I can remember his name that way. Like, San Jose State used to have a wrestling program, too. So, like, we were always welcome to come in and work with the judo guys. They respected us and vice versa, especially since Dave Camarillo was training over there. And again, the level of judo at San Jose State is so high level. Like, Mike Swain's the head coach, for example. Yoshishida. They produced like multiple Olympians and medalists and stuff like that. But the wrestling program wasn't. I don't want to say it wasn't at that level, but it wasn't at that level right now. They wound up cutting the wrestling program at some point, which was a shame because the coach was really helpful. Like, saw me like doing stuff and was like, oh, let me show you this type of stuff. And like, we would do that a lot. Like, there was a few of us that would do that. Like, BJ, Cameron, and myself would go to different places and want to train that type of stuff. And that was always a big thing for BJ, that he just wanted to learn as much as possible. Shocked about the Newaza time. Remember, like, this is a local tournament, although I don't know who's reffing that match at this point, but it could have been a high-level ref. But also the rules on ground fighting were different. Like, they called it the Camarillo rules later on, that, because Camarillo was doing so much judo time that they were going to go ahead and, this is not judo, like, you got to do stand-up, so they actually started limiting that. But there's a pretty good argument that Dave Camarillo has a lot to do with that, because he was doing so much Newaza to folks that they started pulling that off. Some guys you knew they were just going to be monsters right away. And it's funny, you see like Jacare wearing a Gracie Baja patch. Like, I don't think he ever actually trained a Gracie Baja. But like, if you were one of the big gyms, and I think this still happens, that if you were one of the big gyms back in those days, particularly if they knew you had promising, like the big thing like the coaches wanted, like the major coaches, they wanted that team title. They wanted to be the one that had that. So if you were a guy that came in from a different team, like kind of one of the teams that weren't like in contention for like the big team title, you would kind of get absorbed into one of them. So Jacare got absorbed into Gracie Baja and competed in for a while. Obviously a brown belt right now, maybe even a black belt. But a split happened because essentially he didn't want to close out with Hodger. He didn't want to bow out with Hodger. I don't remember which was which. He wanted to fight Hodger. Which makes sense. Like, he's a competitor, but also, like, that title meant something. I mean, it still means something right now, but the difference between, like, in terms of sponsorships and endorsements and whatnot that gets you out of things as a black belt champion versus a black belt runner-up could have been huge for Jacare. And if you remember, like, Jacare came from pretty humble beginnings. A guy from Manouche, like, I can't remember enough of this story. Like, I know it's out there, like, to say that, if he came up in poverty or not. I don't think he came in for, like, big means, but, like, one of these things that made some of these guys so good is they were hungry. And when I say hungry, it's not only hungry to be the best. I mean, literally, like, this is their method of putting food on the table. And you're going to have a really hard time beating somebody that's trying to put food on their table. And Jacare fought you like he was fighting for every meal at this point. So, yeah. I've actually hung out with Jacare a few times, especially when you're like, if you remember Gilberto, he had Jiu-Jitsu Pro gear. You see Jacare is wearing the Corral gear right now. Gilberto at one point was the Corral representative. When Jacare came up, it was Gilberto that took Jacare around. And eventually they developed a friendship. Gilberto became Jacare's manager. I think he's still his manager right now. I haven't talked to Gilberto in years. He was another guy that was totally on the scene in the with the Jiu-Jitsu Pro gear booth. But he was the guy that was on the scene, like you'd all see him, like with Corral. Like everybody wanted to get their gi sponsor from Corral because of guys like Jacare. Like everything kind of comes in waves and generations and stuff. And yeah, Jacare was just, he was the total package in terms of, I'm not going to say he was 100% the most technical guy in the world, but again, like an athleticism and a physicality combined with the technique that he had, pretty amazing. Absolute champion, and like wound up beating Hodger. Obviously, like the story is he got his arm busted, but he still went on and won the match. And he only recently got surgery for that. But I remember like Gilberto and Jacare were up in San Francisco almost immediately after he got that title. Like they were running a booth at the United Gracie, like Charles and Half Gracie's tournament, and everybody came up to Jacare. Oh yeah, congratulations on the win. Like, how's the arm though? And like Jacare, oh yeah, it's fine. And every time somebody would ask him that, he didn't speak English, he would just drop to the floor and start doing a bunch of push-ups. So it's one of my Jacare stories right there. I don't have any stories about these two guys. This is footage that Scotty must have shot when he was. I can't remember at the time that MatBurn came out if Scotty had moved down to Brazil. He's certainly been to Brazil a bunch. If you don't know, Scotty went down to Brazil first. He was one of the first gringos to go down there. He had a great time, and then he came back up here. I went down with Halp. I was there for about 2 months, but that's the only period that I was down in Brazil. I had a good time, and I really enjoyed the people. I had nothing bad to say about it. It didn't move me to the point that I was going to drop everything and move down to Brazil. Whereas I remember really specifically, it was after 9/11, 2001, and quite frankly, Scotty had a bad breakup. He's like, I'm going to go ahead and move down to Brazil. So he moved down there, and he lived there 3 to 5 years. And he made his connections. He met a lot of guys down in Brazil, and that was his thing at that point. But I wanted to stay up here in the United States, like partially because of my family. Like Scotty's lived in a whole bunch of places. I've lived in the Bay Area of California my entire life, and I come from a large family. So I didn't like Brazil. It's not that I didn't like Brazil. I didn't like Brazil more than where I was living, the situation I was in. It didn't inspire me to like, I got to go ahead and move down to Brazil. But the point of this story is, so a lot of the Brazilian footage you see at this area and the connections and whatnot, and the growth of OTM at that point, was Scotty going in and making those connections. Like he found out about Jacare before anybody else did. He found out about the Mendes brothers before everybody else did. Like we sponsored them at one point. It just goes on and on and on and on. The guys who went through a whole bunch of tournaments. Like he befriended Paquetá. Paquetá, again, like red belt. Carlson Gracie's best friend, had footage going back from the 50s. And a lot of the stuff that we have, I have some stuff in my collection from Paquetá, but a lot of that footage unfortunately got lost. But while Scotty was down in Brazil doing that, like then I was like, okay, I'm an American. I want to see Jiu-Jitsu grow in America. Like I want to go out and collect as much footage out of the Americans that I can, and kind of hype them up. Because again, we were the media source at that point. You weren't going to see this on ESPN. And none of the other things. Like we were the outlet there, so like I felt it was my job to like do what I could to grow jiu-jitsu in the United States. But it was a worldwide thing, and I think the partnership worked out really well there. Scotty in Brazil, me here. If one of us could do something, we would do it, and then we complemented each other really well. This is the end of the video. I can't stop the way this is streaming right now, the software. Like if I stop or pause it or something like that, it'll reset all the way back to the beginning. Again, if anybody knows anything about OBS, you can tell me if I can do anything better with this. I want to say though, this is, this is clearly Brazil, which you're looking at right now. Actually, not clearer than Brazil. I don't remember the waves being that big in Brazil. I don't think that's like, we're from NorCal, so we're pretty close to Santa Cruz. If you want to talk about big waves, we got Mavericks around here, Santa Cruz, Half Moon Bay, and stuff like that. These clearly aren't Mavericks. If I had the volume right now, and if I could listen to it, like I'm 99% sure this is off the shots of Brazil, but Atlantic waves get that big? I can't be a poser. It's not like I'm a surfer. Like somebody that I grew up with actually got eaten by a great white shark. So, and we had, the water's cold, you're on undertows, and like surfers around here have to be a bit crazy. So like, I've tried it a few times, but I'm like, yeah, I'm cool on getting out there. Although now that I know like somebody that's been eaten by a shark, the chances of anybody else I know getting eaten by a shark are completely astronomical. This footage wasn't included on the original release that we had of MatBurn. Like what you've seen so far was our entire tape. Like I said, we didn't have a lot of the skits and whatnot on this. So when we built this DVD, we had a lot of extra time. We had to throw some other stuff on here. So this is off the extra footage right here. So Marc Laimon versus Ruff, Ruff, who has a school down in Arizona. Laimon, I think, is like one of the most important Americans out there. Like without Laimon, Laimon, like, had the gym, was the go-to guy. Like, I've told these stories before. Like, when he founded Cobra Kai, well, actually starting off, like, it starts off with John Lewis and J-Sec Jiu-Jitsu. And then Laimon was living there, and eventually they had their split, and they kind of moved on. Yeah, I've been in days in there, and it's like, you see guys like Rico Rodriguez, Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell, a bunch of fighters like that in there. And then Marc Laimon was the guru there. Like Lovato, like went and trained with him for a long time actually too. Like actually moved out there when Marc Laimon was going to fight Huron Gracie. He brought Rafael Lovato moved to Vegas to help him prepare for there. Jeff Glover, like that was, in my opinion, the place to train for a point too. As technical as he is and as great of an instructor as he is, from a day-to-day standpoint, I don't think Laimon loved that aspect of it. And when I say day-to-day aspect with that, like if you want to run a school, like, you don't just, like the names that I produce are one thing to run, but you also have like, the white belts and whatnot that come in, like the families, the kids and all of that. And I don't know if Laimon had the same enjoyment out of that. So Cobra Kai is still there. He essentially gave Cobra Kai to Sim Go. At this point, Team Takedown came around. You had Johnny Hendricks, Shane Roller, and there was another one. We called them Laimon's Toys, basically. He had like high caliber wrestlers that came in. That wanted to learn jiu-jitsu, that wanted to have this MMA career. And eventually what had happened was, like, again, like any coach would be stoked to get guys of that caliber, that dedicated. Like Team Takedown was an interesting concept, that you're basically a full-time employee of Team Takedown. They were going to take care of you through all the rankings coming up. When I say rankings of like MMA rankings, like when you're doing that, till you got to the big show. Their best one, obviously, was Johnny Hendricks, who fought GSP for the title and gave him a hell of a fight, as I recall, on that too. So like essentially, they made an offer to Laimon to. They wanted to transfer from Vegas to Oklahoma for whatever reason. They made an offer to Laimon to move out there. So Laimon essentially like took that offer right there, be able to go ahead and teach and work with Team Takedown and move out there. But he gave the school to Sim Go, and Sim Go was a guy that really, if you've seen him, like, it's been years now. He still looks like he's 12 years old. Sorry, Sim. He hasn't aged. That's a compliment, actually. But Sim Go is like the type of guy who'd be sleeping on the doorstep. He'd be the first one in, the last one out of the gym. He just loved all aspects of it. So he was absolutely the right guy to take over the gym. So now it's Sim Go's Cobra Kai, and he took it over, and the school's doing wonderfully, I think, right now. I haven't been to Vegas in a while. I haven't trained in Vegas in a while. Whereas like Team Takedown, I think, is dissolved, and Marc Laimon moved back to Wisconsin. Like for another article I was doing, I googled his name because I haven't talked to Laimon in a while. I wonder if his phone number's still the same, but I hadn't talked to Laimon in a while, and so like I googled it. And then I found out he's teaching in Wisconsin right now, which I know that's where he's from. Like, if you ever ask, like Laimon had a tape collection that rivaled mine. He collected, like, he filmed, like, he did his things in style. Like, we released a DVD series that he put out, actually. The Tournament Tested Techniques, it says. Which was the whole idea that we did the one-on-one submissions, like watching the video, replaying, and watching things over and over again. Laimon was the first one who did that. We weren't the first ones to do that, so I got to give him credit for that. Just technical. And I consider like there's this great rivalry. When I talk about great rivals in jiu-jitsu, like the Laimon versus Lister battles. You had Laimon, Lister. They had some great matches over the years, and they split. I think they're 2-2 or something like that. 1-1. Here we are. Couldn't have done that. We misspelled Jake Shields too. That's awful. This here is the Pain Inc. tournament, which is a tournament in Northern California. Pain Inc. was Brian Johnston's company. Brian Johnston, remember, was like one of the early AKA fighters. He fought a lot in Japan. He was doing pro wrestling, and like him and Don Frye were tag team. And unfortunately, Brian suffered a stroke that essentially retired him. So he's had his good days and bad days and stuff like that. I'm still friends with him on Facebook, actually. But his company, Pain Inc., threw this tournament. And it was the first grappling tournament. He asked some of us to come out and support and film and whatnot. So like, sure, no problem. I see Dave, who was coach at AK at that point, reffing. And then and he had talent that showed up, like Jake Shields versus John Fitch right here. And they're both up and coming. Well, I think at this point, Jake was the more established guy. He actually fought in Japan and stuff like that. And John Fitch had some matches too. I can't remember at this point if he was in the UFC or not. But Fitch is as blue collar as they come. Like I remember when he first started training at AK, when he first came over. The story is that he walked in there. And he's just like, he would do whatever training that was there. Like, he would jump. He was one of the few guys that really took advantage of, like, Dave Camarillo's jiu-jitsu classes. Like, so after his MMA training, he would throw the gi on. You would want to learn that. Like, their submission grappling, you would learn that. If you You know, if there was a wrestling class or a kickboxing class or whatever, he was just there to learn. So, yeah, so like he eventually became the captain of the AKA team at that point, just because it's hard. Speaking of hard, like people talk about broke Fitch. So there was money on the line. This was the finals of the match right there. So that guillotine would, when you went into it again, would have put anybody else out. And I think at some points, like, again, this video is a little blurry. Remember, this is standard definition right now. You can see like his spine popping out. But I talked to him afterwards, like, yeah, like there's a $500 prize on that. It's like, you're going to have to kill me to like get that off of me. So, yeah, he wasn't going to tap for nothing. Because like that 500 was just rent and grocery money at that point. You just spoil the ending right there. I know they had another grappling match. I can't remember what the outcome on that was, but this is the first time they've competed against each other. But they did have another match. But I remember that too. I've rolled with Fitch a number of times too, and the guy was pretty much untappable. Like he would we're just one of those guys. Like, yeah, you're gonna have to kill this dude. Yeah. And the fact that he's strong goes without saying, and he's technical. But I just think he was one of the hardest workers ever. He was one of the hardest workers that I've encountered right there. Jake looks young in this too. They both look young to me, actually. You don't see Jake Shields much on his back either, huh? Not my real name 23. Thanks for doing this. Hey, thanks for showing up, man. I appreciate you spending some time with me. I'm glad to hear you had a good time. Yeah, we're hanging on there right now. We'll be back. Like, word is that we might be able to come back to a limited capacity next week. Santa Clara has had some of those restrictive shelter-in-places in the country. We were the first place to shut down. But word is like out of the Bay Area, we'll be the first ones to be able to open up again. And strictly open up right now. Like, you've probably heard other gyms in the area have closed down. Like, they're enforcing it pretty heavily right now. Like, we'll just say that I'm taking this pandemic seriously. You know, a lot of the people that I work with or that train with me are medical professionals. So like I'm hearing some firsthand accounts of what's going on. I want to train very badly. I want to open up the gym very badly, but I'm taking what's going on right now very seriously also. So we'll be over, like, you know. Anyway, I'm sure you don't need me to preach about that, but hopefully we'll be back in a limited capacity in about hopefully about a week right now, the way things are going. That's the word on the street. And I've been working pretty diligently with the accounting and whatnot to hopefully make that happen. Yeah, like I said, and John managed to pop his head out right there. Like I said, like if it looks bad on camera right now, I can't even begin to describe how bad this looked in person. Like how much like, ooh, like can you turn your head? Like I know Fitch's neck was busted after this. Like he couldn't turn his head one way or the other. But like I said, it was rent money on the thing. So like I said, I've seen those memes. I've seen those talks on the thing. Like I'm sure he's aware of that too. Broke Fitch, but yeah. Actually, maybe this wasn't the finals. Now I'm looking back right now. It might have been Gil Melendez versus Fitch in the finals. You see Gil in the background. I don't know if Gil had matches up at this point too. I don't know who that is. This is interesting. Like this is the Coke Classic, I think. And and the most interesting thing to me, if you look at this, is Marcelo Garcia, and I'm not sure who his opponent was. Scotty went down and filmed this one. I've been to Georgia myself a few times for jiu-jitsu, but he's fighting a guy from Alliance, and man, like I would love to know the backstory on that because Marcelo Garcia has always been super loyal to Alliance. But the fact we only know who's one name on there probably is kind of a spoiler for this event. What was it like training with Dave Camarillo? I always have this joke that I tell that I've known Dave Camarillo now for, 24 years, and I've liked him for 23 of them. Dave back in the day was nuts. Just kind of this, we'll say, full of youthful piss and vinegar. And you better tap quick, don't. But I learned a lot from him too. Not only from his judo, like, he wasn't a natural instructor at that point. Like, one of the things that I think is so amazing about Dave is watching his progression, not only as like a competitor, but as a teacher and a human being. Like, I want to say that, like, very few, out of all the people I've known been on this planet for a while, like, Dave's like maturity and progression arc is one of the more remarkable ones I've seen. And I can honestly say, like, it really isn't a joke to say that I've known Dave for 24 years and I've liked him for 23 of them or whatever. Because the first year, like, I've never had a bloody nose in my life, and Dave probably gave me about a dozen of them from that guard, and just kicking me in the face, and I'd be bleeding all over the place, and then he'd get mad at me. It's like, bah, 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 bah. But I love Dave to death, and he's like, one of the things that impressed me, I'll tell you this story right now. Like, I've done a lot of super seminars and whatnot. You bring a bunch of guys together and stuff like that, and you teach. And like 9 times out of 10, like, you bring like 8 guys in or something like that. And this is a lesson that he taught me really recently. That I'm gonna go ahead and show my stuff, and they don't pay attention to the other ones. They'll be sitting there and bullshitting on the side and all that, and like, okay, I'm gonna show what I'm gonna do, etc., etc. And Dave wasn't that guy, though. Or Dave's not that guy. Recently we did a seminar together, and it was one of the best seminars that I was ever happy to participate in. It was me, Dave, and Garth Taylor were doing something together. This was only about a year or two, maybe about a year or two ago. And Dave was so into what Garth and me were showing. It's like, I want to show this. And he was like, he jumped in, he grabbed a white belt, he wanted to show it. And it's like, man, this guy's all as a student. That was so, I'm not going to say uncharacteristic of that, because it was just genuine enthusiasm that he had about that he went in there, and the humility that he had that really struck me more than anybody else. I'm not going to mention any names or anything like that. Trust me, I've worked and done these centers a lot of shows. But the attitude he took with that, it's like, it really kind of, not that it caught me off guard, but it really kind of refreshed me. It's like, this guy's here to learn. Like, this guy's a martial artist first. And he made way more of an, like, and he's still making impressions. Like, I attribute large parts of my game to Dave. But, like, even to this day, like I said, this is only a year or two ago, like, that really struck me, especially in comparison to a lot of other folks out there. I love Dave to death. I can't say enough good things about him. Conversation about Gordon. Obviously, the video is over right now. I'm happy to continue chatting right now. I can even actually bring this up, zoom this over right now. I'm happy to chat for a while, answer any questions, talk about this. So let's see. Starting up here, I'm amazed how modern Marcelo Garcia's no-gi bottom game looks like when you compare the stuff that Gordon Ryan does. Look, modern, like, one of my favorite stories is like Scotty saying, like, like Berimbolo, for example, like, nothing's like, and there's only a certain amount of ways to move the body. Like, jiu-jitsu, granted, is like only 20 years at this point right now, 25 years out of this so-called modern era and all that. But you think anybody invented a move? Or somebody wasn't doing this like 100 years ago? Like, I guarantee you, it's like, oh, like they invented the triangle choke. Well, like, there's videos of Kimura doing this type of stuff, like in the 50s, as an instructional video, like, and before those guys learned it, like, you think the samurai didn't do stuff, you didn't think, like, I'm not saying there's not innovations in the way that things are taught, I'm not saying that thing isn't growing and all that, but this idea is like, I can't believe they did this a few years ago and stuff like that. Look, like, everything is cyclical. It kind of comes in this way. There's a foundational level in this, there's reasons that why people do this, there's rule sets, like, whether you're doing this for a fight or if you're doing this for warfare or doing whatnot. But yeah, like, things come in waves. Like, one of my favorite stories going back was like, somebody, there was an argument between two folks. I think it was like Samuel Braga versus the Mendez brothers, like, who invented the Berimbolo. And Paquita pulled Scotty, so like, they're both full of it. They're like, I'll show you the Berimbolo. And he had video of guys doing the Berimbolo in the 80s. Like, not like a version, like the version of Berimbolo and stuff like that. And like, so I think, like, one of the best conversations I had was with Eddie Bravo. That, jiu-jitsu is such a deep art. There's so many different ways of expressing and doing stuff. Like, there's no way you're going to learn everything in your own lifetime. Like, he kind of put it this way. It's like, you need one lifetime to learn, like, the gi version, one lifetime to learn the no-gi version, and maybe another lifetime to do the takedowns and stuff like that. But You know, I don't know if I'm 100% spot on with that, but there's more stuff to learn than you're going to learn in your career. Like, and that's the great thing about this, right? So because there's so much more stuff to learn, they're going to go through that way. You're going to go ahead and pick stuff up, or like you'll develop your own style and stuff that might look new to you, or stuff that isn't part of your repertoire. Doesn't mean it's new or like, you know, it's exotic, or even if you discover it, it's like it's been around. It's just you haven't figured this out, or you haven't discovered, or whatever. But again, that's a cool thing to me. Like it grows that way. So yeah. So going back to like, it's what works, but I think things come in cycles. Like, you know, a generation comes up, they figure out what works for them, that's great. And then another generation comes in, they figure out the counters for it, it grows and it moves forward from that. Like Marcelo Garcia, for example, you know, he was known from the X Guard first. Like, you know, like that's what he won the Abu Dhabi 2003 on. And then he put out the definitive, he put out like a 9 DVD set or something like that on the X Guard. It was like literally everything he knew about the X Guard. And he said he did that for 2 reasons. He said, I held nothing back. And I did that for 2 reasons. Number one, I want to see this position grow. And if nobody knows the stuff that I know, if I don't put this out there, people aren't going to figure out the counters. It's not going to grow. It's going to stay stagnant. The other thing is, it's like, even as a competitor, if I put this out there, that if you come in, if you're going to fight me in Abu Dhabi, you're going to study my 9 DVD sets, like, I've moved past this at this point. And he certainly had. He moved on to the arm drags and stuff like that at that point. It's like, you know, the best competitors in the world, I'm not saying that technique doesn't make a difference, but you can't chase. I've always said this. It's like, there's a great quote by Wayne Gretzky. It's like, you don't skate to where the puck is at, you skate to where the puck's going. And from a technical standpoint, the best competitors in the game are skating to where the puck is going. Like, if you're trying to figure out all the DDD, the Danaher death squat stuff by Gordon Ryan's leg locks or what he's showing on the videos, trust me, they're already 2 steps ahead of you right there. If you study that stuff thinking you're going to beat Gordon Ryan, you're screwed, because they already know the counters and that, and they're a step ahead of that. Like, that's where the great ones are doing right there. Joseph Moffat, I remember you. I remember hanging out with you. I remember you and your daughter, I remember, at the Bud Cup, if I remember correctly. Yep. Good matches, good times. Have I trained with anybody that I can just do nothing against them? Any Hickson stories? So those are 2 questions right there. Number 1, have I trained with anybody? Yeah, plenty of guys right there. I've told a pretty famous story. I got my ass kicked by Hodger when we were blue belts, and I didn't know who he was. And I was down in Brazil and like was getting a little bit of a big head because I was doing well in Coney. So like, oh, you should train with this guy right there. He was 18 at the time, you know, maybe about $180 at that point. I'm like, whatever, because I was a blue belt at the time, but I was handling myself blue belts. Not this one. Hodger beat my ass from one side of the academy. He beat my ass so bad I'm just sitting there like contemplating like, what the hell is going on? Like, and I was doing really well in Brazil up until that point. Now seeing success, I feel a lot better on that. I had another session that right after they won their respective titles, like and I just got my black belt. I had a round robin between Shanji, Lovato, and myself, and yeah, that was humiliating. Like, they beat my ass from one side of the mat to the other. But I learned more from that session than anything else. Like, Shanji radically transformed my game. His understanding of passing and pressure and really simple explanations too, like, really did a lot for me. You know, in the academy, eventually I got to the point, like, you know, there's guys that like definitely had my number and would beat me consistently. Some guys you've heard of, some of you guys have. Some of the obvious guys like Dave and Cameron. But there was never a guy that like I wouldn't give a good match to, or like there's never been a guy that I couldn't catch. Like, you know, it might be like one time out of 100, but like, you know, like I was always in the race. I was a bit more physically primed right now. Like, I've come to the realization right now, I'm gonna be 47 this month. There's probably purple belts out now that could beat me. I'm okay with that too. Like, you know, they're actively competing and stuff like that. Like, you know, one of the things that Jiu-Jitsu did was bust the myths of the old man that like can go ahead and know what they're doing and beat on everybody. That's not my role anymore. Like, you know, like some old men can kick my ass at this point too. They've been training for a while. My job is to kind of like push on the legacy one way or the other if you're doing stuff like this or for these schools and whatnot. So, yeah, but I'll fight you with everything I can when I can, for sure. Let's see. My professor always rants to me about Kosen Judo whenever he gets on this exact topic. yeah, like I said, there's nothing new under the sun in my opinion. It's just stuff we rediscover and relearn and all that. It's new to us. Like that's one of the cool things. Like if you start out art as a white belt, everything's new to you, and then like you get to the point like you've been training for like a long time, like me, and you get a bit jaded. It's like like I've seen all of this, or this is just this, or whatever. And it's like, like that. Like when they say have a white belt mentality, I think that's what that means. It's like you always come with something fresh, always come with something. Always come with the willingness to learn something. Ooh. Anybody else still out there have any questions and want to hit me up about some stuff? A couple minutes. I had the idea that I was going to sit here and sip and drink when I did this. My beer is warm and I've barely touched it. This whole lockdown, I've had a couple. I can count on two hands how many beers or alcoholic drinks I've had in this whole lockdown. I'm not saying I'm in shape or like competition shape because I really haven't trained this whole period. If my guys can't train, I don't want to be the guy that sneaks in their training. I've been trying to do other stuff, some success or not. Like I can't wait to get back. I can't wait to get back. Next time I do one of these things, and I did this today specifically because I knew there was nothing else running. There's not a fight to win. UFC's tomorrow. Bellator's not on. I'm trying to support and watch all that stuff. I don't want to run anything competing on that. Next time I'm going to drink some whiskey. I got do this live. I got Barnett's. My idea was I was going to open it up and drink it with some friends, and then the pandemic hit, so I haven't been able to do that. But it's been sitting here for a while. I saw him on Joe Rogan talking about it. And I told him I would tell him when I thought about it, but ever thought about making a documentary? No, for two reasons. Number one, that's a lot of work. I know there's a good documentary coming out from Robert Drysdale. The funny thing is, it's my sister actually works at one of the top documentary companies in the world. She works at Participant Media. She's on the board and all that. So I actually have some good connections in that world. I don't know what came of it right now. I talked to Drysdale. I can't wait for Closed Guard. And I put him in contact with some of the executives over at Participant. It seemed like they could, at the very least, give him some advice. Right now, my project is, I got a lot of video footage to put up. And I'm trying to figure out ways to put that out. Because I don't want this stuff lost. I want people to know their history. I want people to, kind of talk about this and see where we're at and do that. So, I got hundreds of hours to do. Lately, you've been seeing a lot of video up that I can do because it's digitized and fairly easy for me to do. It's on hard drives. But the vast majority of the stuff I have is on this type of stuff, which is called a mini DV tape. And this mini DV tape, the thing about this is it's a 1-to-1 ratio. I have, for every minute that I want to capture, every minute I want to play, it takes a minute to capture because you have to run it like a tape, which times that by hundreds of hours of tapes that I have. And it's going to take me forever to do that. And I have some good stuff that I'm planning on going up there. This one right there, I don't know if you can see that. This is the last interview with Earle Gracie. So I got to do that. I did an old school story talking about that, but I believe I have the last interview with Earle Gracie. And I want to make sure it gets preserved. I talked about Pakita for a while, and he had this collection from the 50s that he had a whole bunch of stuff. And really important stuff, too. And people have told stories about what they may or may not did. And Pakita me I got this footage right here, and I'll prove this right or wrong. I'm not going to call anybody a liar, but maybe their recollection's different from what video appears on this. And I'm from those days, from what Pakita, and that collection's gone now. When Pakita passed away, a lot of that collection got split up and lost and whatnot, and we wanted to preserve that. But that's not going to happen. But at the very least, I can go ahead and make sure that there's a certain realm that gets produced right there. There's a certain group of guys that won't be forgotten, and I'm trying to get that footage up there. So if you subscribe to this channel, I've made the commitment I'm going to try to put a piece of content up there every weekday. Every weekday something new is going to go up. Or I say new, but a piece of footage is going to go up there every single weekday. And some of the stuff is gold. I didn't realize I had Jocko versus Jeff Munson. That video's got 600,000 views right now. And then some of the other stuff will maybe get 20 views, but that's okay. It's important to those folks. I want to make sure that, I post up a video of my friend Crispin had a match against Megaton, and I know he hadn't seen that in a while, so I'm trying to get that stuff out there. So that's my big project right now. And maybe I'll write a book. I haven't been in that mood right now. But the amount of work that it takes to do a documentary, and not only like maybe even filming and editing, it's like the actual distribution of that. If you don't want to lose money on doing that, like, bluntly, it's $1 million project. And that's straight up. And like I said, when I say that, like, that's the analysis that my sister gave me on that. And like I said, she's about as big as it gets in the documentary world. From the business standpoint, like, you've never seen like a production that she's done, but she's with that red belt thing, and like people want to talk about that, like people bite off way more. Oh, shoot! Like the filming and the editing is actually the easy part. I'm not saying it's easy; it's easier than the other parts about that. Clearing the legal hurdles and stuff like that. But essentially, if you're going to sponsor a documentary, it's a seven-figure deal, because if you do it for any less than that, it's charity at that point. Where you're not going to make any money back on that. And I hate to put it this way, like, the amount of work you're going to put into it, and the hours and labor and all that, to have that and then take a major loss would be tough to take, or tough to do. That was just one perspective I had heard on that. Yeah, maybe I'll do another one of these again. If people enjoy this, if they have feedback, if they like this, maybe I'll do another one of these again when nothing else is going on a day. Like I said, I thought it would be fun to do this on what would be ordinarily a slow Friday or Labor Day weekend or something like that, and give something to start off with and enjoy. So I'm going to end it here. I'm going to finish my beer. So thank you so much for joining me here. Subscribe to this channel. I'll give you updates on this. Check out my webpage or my school. Hopefully we'll open up. I'll see you on Reddit. I'll see you on Facebook. I'll see you on Instagram. Thanks so much, guys. And good chatting with all of you over here. But take care.